March 18th, Colbert County, Alabama. The scene was horrific. Elizabeth Sennett, a 45-year-old grandmother and the beloved wife of a local pastor, was found dead in her own home. It looked like a chaotic home invasion. Furniture was overturned. Drawers were ripped out. Elizabeth had been brutally beaten and stabbed 8 times in the chest and once on each side of her neck. It was violent. It was personal. But when investigators arrived, the chaos looked curated. It looked too perfect. Chief Investigator Ronnie May felt it in his gut immediately. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a stage play designed to look like one. And the director of this macabre play? The grieving husband, Reverend Charles Sennett. The truth was darker than anyone in the community could fathom. The Reverend wasn't a holy man in mourning. He was a man drowning in debt and entangled in an affair. He saw his wife not as a partner, but as an insurance payout. He had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot that was chilling in its cheapness. He paid a middleman named Billy Gray Williams $1,000. Williams then hired 2 young men, John Forrest Parker and a 22-year-old Kenneth Eugene Smith, to do the dirty work. They knocked on her door. She let them in. And they betrayed that trust with unimaginable violence. The plot unraveled at lightning speed. Within a week, the walls were closing in on the Reverend. When investigators confronted him, he couldn't face the consequences. He confessed to his family and then took his own life. But while the mastermind checked out early, the hired hands were left to face the wrath of the law. John Forrest Parker was executed in 2010. But Kenneth Smith? His journey was about to take a detour into a legal twilight zone. Here is where the story shifts from a crime drama to a systemic tragedy. In 1990s, a jury of Smith's peers sat in judgment. They heard the evidence. They saw the crime. And when it came time to decide his fate, they voted. The count was 11-1. An overwhelming majority recommended life in prison without parole. In almost any other courtroom in America, that would have been the final word. Kenneth Smith would have died in prison of old age. But this was Alabama, and Alabama had a legal loophole called judicial override. This archaic statute gave a single judge the power to look at a jury's recommendation, crumble it up, and throw it in the trash. Judge N. Pride Tompkins did exactly that. He overruled the 11 citizens who voted for life and unilaterally sentenced Smith to death. Think about that for a second. The people said, "Let him live in prison." And one government official said, "No, kill him." Years later, in 2017, Alabama finally admitted this practice was flawed and abolished judicial override. But, and here is the cruel catch, they didn't make it retroactive. The law changed, but Smith's fate did not. He was trapped in a time capsule of injustice, scheduled to die because of a law that the state itself later declared unfair. Fast forward to November 17th, 2022. Smith's time had finally run out. The state prepared to execute him via lethal injection. The protocol is supposed to be clinical, efficient, medical. But what happened that night was anything but. For 4 agonizing hours, Kenneth Smith lay strapped to a gurney. The execution team, tasked with inserting the IV lines to deliver the fatal chemical cocktail, simply could not find a vein. This wasn't a medical procedure anymore. It was a botched surgery. They jabbed needles into his arms. They tried his hands. They even attempted a highly invasive central line procedure near his collarbone, digging around in his flesh while he remained fully conscious. Imagine the psychological torture. You have said your goodbyes. You are ready to die, and instead you are being tortured with needles for hours while the clock ticks toward midnight. Finally, the death warrant expired. The state threw up its hands. They couldn't kill him in time. Smith was unstrapped, traumatized, trembling, and sent back to his cell. He was alive, but he was broken. He developed severe PTSD, nightmares haunting him, terrified that they would drag him back to that room. And they did. But Alabama knew they couldn't risk another botched injection. They needed a new weapon. They dusted off a method that existed only in theory, a method never used to kill a human being in the history of the United States. Nitrogen hypoxia. The premise sounds deceptively clean. Our air is 78% nitrogen. It's harmless. But if you breathe 100% nitrogen, your body is starved of oxygen. The lights go out. The cells die. The state sold this to the public and the courts as the humane alternative. They promised it would be quick. They promised unconsciousness would hit in seconds. But promises aren't science. Critics, doctors, and human rights groups screamed from the rooftops. They called it a human experiment. They called Smith a guinea pig. Justice Sonia Sotomayor of the Supreme Court issued a blistering dissent, warning that Alabama was testing a novel execution method on a man they had already failed to kill once. The UN warned it could amount to torture. Even the equipment was suspect. A tightly fitting industrial mask that, if it leaked, could kill everyone in the room, including the spiritual advisor standing by Smith's side. Despite the global outcry, the courts gave the green light. On January 25, 2024, Kenneth Smith was walked back into the Chamber of Horrors. He was strapped down again. A large gray mask with a plastic visor was strapped to his face. In his final moments, Smith looked through the visor and said, "Tonight, Alabama causes humanity to take a step backwards." He made an "I love you" sign to his family. Then, the valve was turned. The nitrogen began to flow. If you believe the state's prediction, he should have simply drifted off to sleep. That is not what happened. Witnesses watched in horror as the painless execution turned into a violent struggle for minutes. Agonizing, long minutes. Smith did not sleep. He thrashed. He convulsed. The force of his seizing was so violent that the heavy medical gurney shook against its restraints. He gasped for air, heaving, his muscles fighting for oxygen that wasn't there. Journalist Lee Hedgepeth, who had witnessed 4 previous executions, was shaken. He said, "I have never seen such a violent reaction to an execution." Smith's spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, watched terror unfold inches from his face, describing the scene as minutes of someone struggling for their life. It wasn't quick. It took 22 minutes from the start of the gas to the declaration of death. For much of that time, Smith appeared to be conscious and suffering. The state officials later tried to spin it, claiming Smith was holding his breath. But the eyewitness accounts paint a picture of a man drowning in dry air. The aftermath was immediate and global. The White House called it troubling. The European Union condemned it. The experiment was complete, and the results were disturbing. But perhaps the most chilling part is what comes next. Now that the seal has been broken, other states are lining up. Oklahoma and Mississippi are looking at nitrogen. Kenneth Smith's fear that he would be the first domino to fall has come true. Meanwhile, the family of Elizabeth Sennett watched this unfold. Her son, Mike, said it was a bittersweet day. "Nothing that happened here today is going to bring Mom back," he told reporters. And he's right. Justice for the victim is paramount. But we have to ask ourselves, is this what justice looks like? A murder for hire trial where the jury was ignored, a botched execution that amounted to torture, and finally a human experiment masked as a medical procedure. Kenneth Smith is gone, but the stain of how he died remains. It forces us to look in the mirror and ask, in our pursuit of punishment, have we become the very thing we are trying to condemn? The line between justice and cruelty is thin, and on that night in Alabama, many believe we didn't just cross it, we obliterated it. They went out for a movie, or a church service, or just tucked themselves into bed, and they never came home. The reason why is absolutely heartbreaking, and it's a reason that remains a mystery to this day. Some stories don't have a neat ending. We are wired to crave resolution. We want the bad guy caught, the gavel to bang, and the credits to roll. But real life isn't a police procedural. Sometimes the story just hangs in the air, suspended in a permanent, haunting space where justice ought to be. These are the stories of lives cut short, of futures erased in a single, brutal nanosecond, leaving behind a silence that echoes not just for days, but for decades. These are the cases that get under our skin and stay there. They defy easy answers and compel us to stare into the darkness, searching for a truth that has remained buried under years of speculation and mishandled evidence. They are more than just cold cases. They are open wounds in history, a testament to the terrifying fact that sometimes the monster isn't under the bed. He's walking free. Today, we aren't just recounting facts. We are unraveling 3 of the most baffling and heartbreaking unsolved cases that have ever kept the world awake at night. I remember the last time I saw a friend who passed away. She was vibrating with energy, buzzing about her plans for the weekend. When you have that conversation, you never, ever think it's the finale. You never imagine that just a few hours later, she will simply be gone.